All right, welcome back here for another edition of the Winning Plays podcast. And guess what? The doldrums of the NBA calendar are here. Things are really quieting down. Oh, wait, no, Chris Forsberg of ESPN Boston. That is not happening.
You just threw me way back. That was like me saying, you just threw me to ESPN Boston, man. Like,
no, I said NBC Boston. Did I say ESPN Boston?
I thought you said ESPN.
Oh, we're going to check the tape on that. I think in my head.
Maybe I'm just hearing. I have an old banner over in the corner. I thought maybe you threw me back. I always fear that. Every time you come on my pod, I'm always like Brian Sport. I almost said Brian Sports Journal. So maybe my head's just a mess. I thought we were going to be nice and relaxing on pool floats at this time of year, but no, there are no doldrums.
So I wanted to wait a couple. I mean, you've heard a pod with already with our good friend Nick Friedel and others on the Celtics Talk pod. I wanted to let the dust settle a little bit. I wanted to see, obviously 1,000 stories have come out since Woj and Shams came out with their initial stories in terms of the Celtics emerging as a team of interest for Kevin Durant here. Let's start here. Let's start in backwards chronology. Jayson Tatum talked last night.
Yes.
As well as Paul Pierce, which had hilarious.
Which is crazy, which is like kind of hilarious.
But let's talk about what's fresh here. Jayson Tatum, he's always been, he talked about how he was trained by his mother early on in terms of having to deal with the media. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this was almost
a prime example.
A prime example. The perfect politician's response last night from Jayson Tatum.
When I was writing about it today, I said he Euro stepped around like the prickliness of the question and kind of just went for the layup. No, he said everything right. He complimented Kevin Durant without being too all over Kevin Durant. And he said, I love this team. I think if you're a Celtics fan, the only thing I probably would have liked to have heard him say, if you're like me and you're leaning towards Team Jaylen, is maybe be a little bit more effusive with praise for Jaylen. But I don't think that was a reflection of how he feels. I think it was more like he's saying, like, look, we're in a good spot. And if like Durant happens, then that's cool too. But I think he understands that the former or the latter of keeping this together is probably the more likely situation. So I think he just covered all his bases just in case. And so I don't know what I can glean from it. I thought it was more interesting that Paul Pierce was like unequivocally no after he created, like, was part of bringing in this super. I don't know, like that one threw me for a loop too. So I feel like Pierce is, I don't know how plugged in Pierce is, but that was more
not very plugged in. Very plugged in probably at least at this stage of the offseason. But yeah, that was, and so for you that missed it, Paul Pierce was asked about what he thought about the Kevin Durant rumors. He's like, no way that's happening. And then went wild with a nice double negative here. They don't got to make no moves. This is the exact quote in terms of what the Celtics viewpoint was for that. And so that was.
But like isn't that a reflection of how like a Celtics super fan takes it? Like, can we call Paul Pierce like a Celtics super fan now?
I think that's the majority of the population of the Celtics fan base right now. I think it agrees with Paul Pierce.
And I'm eager. I'm like, this is the most fascinating part to me. What do you think the split is? Like, if you had to guess, what's the percentage of people that want nothing to change and Kevin and Jaylen Brown to be here? And what's the split that want Kevin Durant?
I'd be like 70-30.
Yeah, I was 75-20. Yeah, I thought 75-25.
Yeah, it's pretty strong, and it's an adamant 70-75.
Right. Allowed 75.
Allowed 75. Listen, Kevin Durant stinks. I don't know if you heard this. But no, it makes sense. I mean, this is, and we can go down all sorts of avenues here in terms of like comparing it to past situations and past trades and things that have blown up. But yeah, the Celtics are set up to be very good for a long time right now. And they're 2 games away from winning an NBA title that no one would have expected. Mm-hmm. And Jaylen Brown is an integral part of that in his prime. So
he was the best player in the finals.
Yeah. For the Celtics.
I've been pretty staunch, like from the beginning when Scal brought this up on our programming on the night of the draft. I completely understand the allure of Kevin Durant, but I also think the volatility of it is what probably scares me a little bit from not only his age to just messing with what works right now. And so that's where my hesitation comes from. There's no denying the talent and what's possible. I don't love the comparison, and I'm probably guilty of making it at some point, but because some people will say, oh, well, you didn't know what the window was going to be when you brought in Kevin Garnett. No, sure. And you certainly didn't know it was going to be 5-6 years more than, when we all thought it was maybe a 2-3 year window out the gates, but they don't win that title that first year. Man, things get a lot more pressure filled. And Kevin Garnett was 30 at that point, not 34, and didn't have quite the injury history. And so, I'm still leaning heavy. But I will say this, one of the things that got me to come down a little bit was that first reported offer, which okay, who knows? I don't think the Nets are going to ever take that deal.
Might be the best I got though.
Yeah. So, okay. So that's where I'm at. So let me throw it at you that if that's the best they can do, if essentially they get to, let's say September 1 and there's real pressure, are we just bringing this thing back or are we taking the best deal out there? Is a Jaylen Brown, Derek White, and a pick or picks, whatever it ends up being, is that enough to make Brooklyn move? And the part B, should the Celtics be willing to make that deal?
Yes, they should. Mm-hmm. Is answer number one. And the Nets, I think it's how desperate is their management / ownership to turn the page.
That's desperate.
That's pretty desperate. But at the same time, it's the risk reward situations.
Yeah.
Okay, let's run it back with Kevin. Let's bring him into camp and let's see how it goes here. If Durant says, okay, I'm good. We're not I just don't want to show up to camp, or just loafs it like James Harden did for a huge chunk of last season. Does his trade value go up in any way? I know he has 4 years left, but do more.
Can Durant do that at 34 though? Can he
I mean, can he sacrifice a year, one of the final years of his prime and totally mail it in? And I don't know, these are only questions the people that really know Kevin Durant can answer in his camp right now. But I guess at the flip side of the coin for Brooklyn, it's okay, well, maybe another team actually gets desperate, an injury happens, or one of these teams that are optimistic about their outlook for next season right now, it blows up in their face, and then they get more serious about making an offer, whether it's a Toronto or some other contender in the West. And so I guess
I keep wondering Phoenix can't do it now with Ayton signed.
Pretty much no.
Miami's probably a no. The Nets would want Bam, and they can't do that based on the whole Rose Rule provision, just like the Celtics ran into in the courtship of Anthony Davis.
We'll get the 6-team trade with Ben Simmons involved, and then
and that's certainly maybe that's what the Nets are trying to figure out. Is there any way you send people around? And there is some fun. Some people put it up jokingly, but the whole Lakers dumping Westbrook and Kyrie ended up in LA. There's all these iterations that make some sense, but that was back before Ayton got traded, and so Ayton got signed. So. It's hard for me to see. And so this is why I think, in part, we all know this news comes out now because the Nets are, feel a little bit desperate and are trying to stoke other rivals so that they don't have to worry about this and let it fester into September. But I think there's also a part of it is just if the Celtics are willing to move Jaylen Brown, they do potentially have the best offer out there. And so, I mean, maybe they don't even have to think about it till it becomes a reality of the Nets calling them and saying okay, we really are intrigued by this. And, is this something that we can get to the finish line? But it's weird. I don't even know if like I said, I still think it's something you got to huddle and debate. It's what does Brad Stevens value most? Does he understand that talent is king and you just got to go get these guys when they're available? Or does he pull back and go, man, we lived that. And we saw how that went when you bring in a sort of a volatile piece and you just don't know. You can have a really talented team, cough, 2019, and that thing can go to hell in a hurry. So, it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. And just from so many sides, but particularly the desperate Brooklyn Nets. And
so, and from that standpoint, too, from Brad's planning perspective and, having, when you make this call, when you have, which everyone in the world would expect him, you're going to inquire about Kevin Durant here, you have to know to some degree that this can leak and be used again. So that people were talking about the semantics of oh, was it an offer? Was it not an offer? Okay,
it's so dumb. People have this vision that it's fantasy football and that I sent you a definitive proposal that you have to hit accept or reject. And that's just not the way it works in the NBA. And another thing I throw out is, like, where else do you start a conversation?
Right.
They're not, this, I mean, you can ask for Tatum, Celtics aren't doing it.
Right.
But like everything starts with Jaylen Brown and salary match. And then you go from there. That's why it's like sort of, who knows if it was even an offer, it might just be connecting of the dots, but but I would hope in that instance, Brad Stevens, in his very open way, has communicated to Jaylen Brown and said, like, look, we have to, these are sort of players that you have to call about and we're not the ones invoking your name. There's the one asking. And that's just where the conversation goes, and be open and honest about like how you see this thing going out. And, look, those are no fun conversations to have, but that's why Brad gets paid the money he does to put this thing together.
If you are Brad in the front office right now, when you're like, who are you talking to, before even you had this, assuming these conversations happened weeks ago, and, whether or not they're going to be revisited, we'll see. The consultation of like Tatum and or Ime in this situation. I assume Tatum, based on his response last night, he obviously pleaded ignorance to it all, which is what is the right play to do, obviously, in that situation.
Said all the right things. Right.
Said all the right things.
Point to the Olympics, point to the past. Hey, I'm not even thinking about the future.
He's great. Yeah. And I'd assume that those aren't conversations you have with him until it becomes like serious, which it sounds like is not there. You have the value of like Ime here, I think, is like when you compare this situation to the Kyrie in 2017 scenario, which is, it's far different for a multitude of reasons. But bringing in, blowing up your team for a superstar, or not even blowing up your team, but, making a seismic change. How much do you value the fact that Ime worked with him and like can give you the perspective of being like, okay, if Ime wants this guy, maybe we should think about doing this, or being like, oh, if Ime's, lukewarm,
hesitant, right?
Then that makes a decision for us.
I think that has to be huge. I think that that's internal knowledge of just what it's like to bring that guy into that situation, and like what it goes like and how he pushes people. Now, the one thing we've consistently heard about from those who have been around Kevin Durant and the work ethic and the way he, like, I think my guess would be the lean for Ime would be like, you need this guy. You don't understand. He's otherworldly talented and he's like super good. And I think, that's just part of it. That's part of the reason I think Scal was so effusive about it, just all the reports out of Golden State and just watching him and the player that he is. And, it's hard not to love the player. I think it's on Brad at that point to balance the age and, again, the volatility of it, which again, isn't an easy part. But all the information you can gather. It's like when James Harden became available, right? Like Ainge huddles his guys and says, is this something we want to do? And then they call everybody. And from, outside people that have been around that situation, they were like, no, like this probably isn't the path you want to go down. And so you take that as part of the reason you step back. And so we'll see, if the Celtics don't ultimately, if there's no other rumors about the Celtics, maybe they got to that point and they said, yeah, I just don't love the volatility of it. If they linger in there, then you have to think that the coach and, the superstar would be on board with it. I would want to throw that back at you though. Like, how do you think Tatum would feel? Because one of the things everyone keeps saying is like, oh, Tatum and Durant would be great. All of a sudden you go from being the guy and the clear 1A, 1B situation to sort of reversing. And now it's more Durant in that spotlight. And I don't know, there is some pressure that comes off you, but like, doesn't Tatum want that at this point and want to be the guy in the 1A, 1B situation?
Yeah, that's a fascinating point because, and that's again, when you need to have that conversation. And in terms of what's the most important to Tatum right now? And is it, okay, bringing in Durant will take pressure off me, will make us better. And I don't really care about being a 1B versus a 1A. Like that's just as well to me. Or if it turns him off and from a standpoint, you're like, hey, this is kind of like, this is my, Jaylen was, my running mate here, but push comes to shove. This is my team here. And I don't like this being taken away from me from some degree. So there are just so many layers here when you have, and it's just wild that this is.
And the biggest layer of all, which we probably which I've every time I do one of these podcasts, I feel like I try to get it out of the way early, but Brad has to know what Jaylen is feeling about his own future. Like, I feel like that is the most important part of this all.
100%.
And what's a little bit frustrating is that because there is this wall between us and the players and even their circle, it's hard sometimes to gauge where a player is at. So, there's there's so many layers to this. Like, Celtics can offer Jaylen an extension in October. Not going to take it. Not worth, the sacrifice of money after already sacrificing money. Then there's going to be like, if he's all NBA next year, which he might be because these Celtics will be so good, all of a sudden this opens up new avenues to bigger deals. And like the CBA renegotiation could happen. So it's hard to just gauge where he's at. I just operate with the assumption that he's going to be a free agent in the summer of 2024. The Celtics at that point should be willing to give him a max offer, and he should know all this. Like, there should be direct communication to the player. Like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to offer you this in October. We're not going to be mad when you reject it. We're going to offer you this in the summer of 2023, and we're going to understand if you don't take it. And then 24, 5-year deal is going to be waiting for you, seeing as long as nothing goes off the rails. How does Jaylen feel about that? And you have to have some indication, because that should dictate how aggressive you are in the Durant sweepstakes. And that's the one thing that I feel like is really difficult from us on the outside to get a gauge on, because you'll never get quite a clear answer. Like, sometimes Brad Stevens might not have a clear answer depending on like what information he's getting from Jaylen's circle and Jaylen's people close to him. And I'm sure he asks assistant coaches, like, what does he say when you're talking to him? Like, it's just so hard to get a read on that. I will say this. There's been no indication that he doesn't want to be here. It's just, what does he want ultimately? Does he want to be the 1A somewhere else? Does he want his own market? These are things that they need to get a read on as they assess what's ahead.
And that honestly might be the most important thing that comes out of this, no matter what happens, is this is forcing those tough conversations to happen now.
It's not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. It's honestly not a bad thing at all if you're from a Celtics perspective, from a planning perspective. And you at least, this is, there may be 5 players, maybe 10 in the NBA where if they become available there, like, this is something that the Celtics would consider. And on top of that, like, when does a player like this come available and also be under contract for 4 more years, which would be, the requirement for even thinking about making a deal like
for sure.
This. When we know that Danny Ainge walked away from a number of deals on the table just because of that flight risk, whether it was Kawhi or Anthony Davis, et cetera. And so,
except Evan Fournier.
Evan Fournier was the one. Listen,
he walked right into that one.
But that was you needed that TPE to stay alive. So that was the
all worked out perfectly. That's another podcast.
I know, right? We have to spend 10 minutes on the death of the TPE later. We missed that week.
Someone's going to call me about that and say I'm criticizing. I'm not. You got Malcolm Brogdon. I'm cool with it. Right. I'm just saying. I spent probably 100 hours on TV in the last 2 years talking about traded player exceptions, and here I am. And there's Derek White is mildly attached to the TP. So.
But yeah, so the fact that going back to Jaylen, the fact that those conversations be had, and you're not going to get 100% clear cut answer one way or another if you're the Celtics when you're having Jaylen Brown, because it's 2 years in the future. And this isn't Kyrie Irving making, public statements that he goes against months later, but things can change, understandably so for both sides. But those conversations privately, publicly, with people behind the scenes will help guide the team's intentions here in terms of maybe putting a percentage on being like, okay, we think he's 80-20 to resign in 2 years, or 90-10, or maybe, oh no, sounds like he might eventually want to go to Atlanta or something like that. And if he has that opportunity, and then that's when you could potentially change any line in the sand you have in terms of negotiations with Brooklyn. But I think that's a great point of view. That is where everything starts here. And then once you have that in your back pocket in terms of however you want to gauge it, then you can kind of proceed from there.
Do you think Brad calls Kanye and is like, hey, quick question.
Right.
Trying to decide about Jaylen here. Like, how you feeling? I don't know. It is funny. That's the thing. Like, Jaylen has what I would say is a pretty small, tight circle. And now he's added Kanye to the representation side of it, and Juice Brand is obviously going to be big. It makes you wonder just like what is his vision for his career arc, and I'm eager to see like how it all plays out. And I'm ready for media day when he's bombarded with these questions. If we don't find a way to get to him sooner, maybe we need to go get some scuba gear and get down in the wherever he's doing those underwater workouts and try to get some answers here, B-Rob.
All right.
Can we talk about where the Celtics currently sit in terms of championship odds?
Heavy favorites for not only, I think, championship odds, but also Kevin Durant.
Well,
favorite
true.
to land. I mean, and that's something where it's like, okay, that's just the betting public responding to
is suckers, yeah.
There. But it's, I mean, they are slight favorites. Does this surprise? I mean, this kind of happened after the Brogdon Gallinari stuff. It's hard to, I guess you can put the Bucks right there, but it makes, again, you're going to make a big move like this when you're the slight title favorites. Like,
yeah. So I think there's a couple things at play. When I see those odds, I say, just like you said, for the Durant perspective, I think people are motivated by news. And so they see these reports come out and look, they hear us talk and say that even if the Celtics aren't supremely motivated to make this move, they are the favorite if they're willing to put Jaylen Brown into that conversation. So I think that promotes some betting. I also think they understand that it's probably unlikely. So if you can get people to bet that odd, which is maybe a little bit weird because it's short money, but yeah, like I think that sparks it. The more interesting thing to me is the Celtics just as the title favorites right now, and like the win total favorites. I do agree. Like I can see the pathway to that. It's funny to see the numbers are kind of low. I think some have them at 53, some have them at 55. You'd think after last season and how much struggle they had at the start that number would be higher. I think it's a reflection of how good the East is going to be.
Yeah.
And that people are a little bit scared to put a number up at 58, 60 when that's going to be a hard number to hit. But yeah, seeing them slide ahead of the Bucks and stay there based on like, some of they added people, but obviously they get Middleton back. I'm curious to see how that all plays out. But, so that was my big, I actually ended up writing something today because I think it's funny. We've been sitting here, like, this is honestly, I've had more TV, radio requests in the last 48 hours than I did probably in the finals because everyone's so worked up about Durant. And that's a good thing. Like, I like being busy and all that. But it's so funny for me to hear like the fan base screaming at each other about like, trade Jaylen Brown, no, keep him, like, and all this. And if you step back for a damn minute, like the Celtics just came off the finals. They're the betting favorite for next season. And we're talking about whether it's better to have a 26-year-old all-star or a 34-year-old, like top 50 player in the NBA history. And it's like, it's crazy to me sometimes. It's like, it's an embarrassment of riches right now because of where you've put yourself. And so I don't know, like as much as it's fun to squabble about it, maybe just step back at one point and be like, damn, this is kind of a preposterous thing to be yelling about.
Life has gotten pretty good in a year for the Celtics. You think about where the Celtics were a year ago, coming off of a rough first round against the Nets, wondering like, how could they get back to contention? And now it's like, no, they've come off of probably a universally beloved offseason set of moves with the Brogdon trade and Gallinari coming off the finals run. And you can debate, okay, how much was the finals run the perfect storm of injuries and, escaping in game sevens?
For sure.
Or you can say, the Celtics were also beat up in that series and they're run down and they got better than they've added more than any other team in either conference so far this offseason. So
I keep hearing people say like, it's not going to be as easy to get back to the finals this year. And I don't disagree. Like once you get there, there's no guarantee you get back there. And like, look, talk to the Atlanta Hawks about getting to the Eastern Conference Finals and how hard it is. And like, there's never a guarantee. And yet I look at him like Brooklyn, Milwaukee, Miami, and Golden State. I don't know if they got the easiest path. Now they definitely caught some breaks along the way. Middleton, the dysfunction in Brooklyn, Miami being unable to consistently score the basketball. But like it would have been nice to have a Chicago Bulls thrown into that mix or whatever. But maybe the Bulls will be better. I have no idea. So it's you certainly are always looking for the way to make yourself the best possible. And you should never be content just because you were there and you feel good about coming back with what you've got, which is why invariably we're talking in late July about Kevin Durant.
How long do you think Kevin Durant plays for? Like he's 34 right now. He's got like a 4, is he someone?
Didn't he always say he was? I remember talking to. That's it. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up. I think he came out like maybe 2017, 2018, and was like, "I'm not playing forever."
Yeah.
I'll have to go back and check that because I remember asking Brad, and Brad at that point was like, "I'm not coaching forever."
Right.
And boy, I wish I had dug a little deeper on that one. Pie on my face, or egg on my face. I don't know. Like Do I think he can be MVP caliber player for 2 more years? For sure. Like if there's no injury setback. Do I think he can, we used to hear Doc Rivers say all the time, Paul Pierce could score until he's 50. Like, I feel like the same's true with Kevin Durant. He can be doing old man jumpers until he's 50 if he wanted to, but is he going to be super impactful at 37 and 38? I'm slightly less bullish on that. And I think it just comes back to health. Like, that's a really hard injury to come back from. And the fact that he did and played to such a high level, it's still, the games played is a little concerning over the last 2 years. And I think that just rolls into my hesitation. But like, if he's healthy, I feel like he's going to be pretty good.
I mean, averaging 30 a game. The fact he played 37, I mean, they played him so many minutes in those last 2 months.
It really is wild.
The injury. It's nuts. And then I guess we saw what happened in the playoffs because I think is that he was just kind of, I don't know, he wasn't playing on one wheel, but you could tell that he certainly wasn't himself against the.
I'm going to flip it on you. How good can Jaylen Brown be in the next 4 years? It's
tough to put a ceiling on Jaylen Brown because he just comes back better every year.
It is great.
And the consistency he's been able to do that with is, I think, has obviously surpassed a lot of expectations people had for him coming out of the draft originally. I don't think he's ever going to be at a top 10 in the NBA current player level, but 11 to 20, I think he's making his way there as we speak. And it would not surprise me at all for him to see him sell there. There's, the handle obviously still needs work.
Can he get a basketball underwater to dribble while he's jumping with those weights? That's my only quibble. But no, I'm with you. I don't know what the ceiling is, and I'm done with the ceiling because if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I probably would have said, I don't know, top 40, top 35, and he's already beyond that because of the advancements he's made, and the fact that he was the best player in the finals says something about where he's going, or the best player on the Celtics. I don't know. Part of me says in 2 years he could be a top 20, top 15 kind of guy. But that's still a lot of strides to make. And that's still the hard steps are ahead for Jaylen. I think he's willing to put in the effort to try to get there. But yeah, it's all part of the equation. Just how far he's obviously flawed. And that's why when people are you don't understand, you're telling me you're not willing to give up this player, but Kevin Durant is so much better. Right. But there's so many other variables that go into it than just Jaylen versus Kevin Durant and all that.
And the other part about Jaylen too, is from a playoff standpoint, he's proven throughout his career that a lot of guys you worry about disappearing there, he's not disappearing.
Yeah.
His game isn't 100% of what it is in the regular season, but it's pretty damn close to that. And that's a crucial part for any player, especially one that's getting better and better at this point. And we know Durant obviously is that guy too, but that makes you, this isn't DeMar DeRozan here, where you'd have a guy who would put up crazy regular season numbers and then would turn into a puddle on a bigger stage in a 7-game series. So it's
fascinating, and I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. No. So we're going to be having 7 more podcasts on this. So I hate to use up all of our bullets, but I will say this: there's as much as Jaylen's name has danced in all these rumors from Harden to Kawhi. People keep saying Anthony Davis, but
he wasn't really. That's more Tatum than
that was way more Tatum. And I keep trying to set people straight on that, but they keep yelling at me and telling me that wasn't true. So I think it's just a reflection. There's a very small group of guys you would be willing to trade Jaylen Brown for, and the contract situation is what makes this one a little bit more intriguing than most. Just because if there was 2 years left on Kevin Durant's deal, I'm not even sure this is a conversation. Maybe it is, but it's just the fact that he's under contract, and Brad has clearly prioritized the length of people's deals when making them. And so I don't care about draft picks. Some people have said, and you started we brought this up earlier and I short circuited it, was the whole Brogdon thing. Did the Celtics make the Brogdon deal because they were okay, this Durant thing's probably not happening? Or did they say if we get Brogdon, we now have the depth? I probably lean towards, they're just trying to build the best roster as possible, and it just gives you more avenues if you do go down.
Both ways.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's so much of roster construction is about flexibility, and that's why we talk about TPEs, and that's why we talk about bringing in players with redundancy. I'm not necessarily sure the move was tied to something. They didn't just be oh, we're out on Durant, so we're making this deal, and they didn't make it we're getting this guy because we want to be in on Durant. I just think they're in a vacuum. This is if we get. Malcolm Brogdon, this makes our team better and we still have flexibility. And so I just think that's how they operate.
All right. Well, the Celtics are going to have another month or two to think about that flexibility.
So we're not talking about Juhan Bagaron anymore.
Yeah.
Like that ended hard. A lot of talk about the third center before this came along.
Your guy, Trevion, heading out west. What a shocker.
It actually hurt. It hurt my feelings a little bit. We melted in Las Vegas for the 30 hours I was there because I was really excited to see Trevion. And now Golden State Warriors, man. Golden State Warriors just want to make me feel awful lately. So
first a title, and then they steal Chris Forsberg.
I'm not sure what I'm more mad about.
Well, hopefully NBC Sports Bay Area can have you on to preview his G League.
ESPN Bay Area.
ESPN Bay Area can wrap this thing together.
So when I'm proven wrong, when you listen back to this and you did say NBC Sports Boston, just know that I am. I told you before we came on, my wife got bit by a dog, and I'm fearful for her safety right now. So I need to go. Maybe my mind was distracted temporarily.
Well, I think I screwed you because I said NBC Boston. And then,
you threw in.
But that sounds obviously there's no sports there, so you're used to seeing NBC Sports Boston. So that's me just setting you up for failure there. But in any
case, that. I appreciate you owning that.
Chris Forsberg, ESPN Boston. NBC Sports Boston.
Boston.com.
Boston.com. Boston.
All my previous stops.
Winning plays. Make sure you check them out all week long.
I'm on every podcast in the America this week, so please go check them out. But mostly winning plays. Like, subscribe, check us out on B-Rob's YouTube page, all that stuff.
Where else did you go today? Or yesterday? Was it all?
There's been some calls. I don't want to promote other people's stuff on your program. Okay, so I did Mannix's pod. Okay. Jason McIntyre from Straight Fire.
Oh man, so you're like everywhere national this week there.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I don't know if that's a good thing. I haven't got a haircut in like 2 months, so all these video pods are going to really screw me. So if you're listening on the audio version, I look great. No facial hair and clean cut like B-Rob over there.
The best. All right, Chris Forsberg, make sure you find him everywhere all week long on every single podcast available, including Winning Plays. We'll talk to him from Parts Unknown in August when we're both
check out B-Rob on Celtics Talk like once a week at this point.
Right. All right, thanks for listening, guys. Rate, review, subscribe, and we'll talk to you all later this week.